Chief Elias Thorne, bone-weary after a double shift, watched the young barista in the dim alley. With precise, practiced movements, the man cinched a bulging trash bag, securing it with a knot Elias hadn't seen in 2 decades. In that instant, the weight of the night vanished, replaced by a jolt that slammed into his chest like a physical blow. Inside the midnight beacon, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pallor over the vinyl booths. Elias ordered a black coffee, his eyes, usually sharp and discerning, now fixated with an almost desperate intensity on the barista, Leo Maxwell. Leo moved behind the counter with a quiet, almost artistic efficiency, wiping down surfaces, steaming milk, oblivious to the chief's unwavering scrutiny. Elias gripped his steaming mug, the warmth doing little to thaw the ice forming in his gut. It couldn't be a coincidence. The knot was too unique, too specific. His mind raced, struggling to reconcile the mundane scene before him with a ghost from his past, a memory he had buried so deep it felt like a dream. Disbelief warred with a terrifying, impossible hope. A hazy warmth enveloped Elias as his mind drifted back 20 years. The sun beat down on the police academy training ground, sweat plastering his uniform to his back. "No, no, Thorne, you're all thumbs," a bright voice laughed. Isabella, Izzy, Rossi, his partner, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, leaned over him. "You gotta get it right, especially for evidence bags. An unbreakable knot," she demonstrated, her nimble fingers weaving the rope into a complex, elegant pattern. "See? Tight, secure, and impossible to accidentally unravel." Elias tried again, fumbling. "Show off," he grumbled, but a smile tugged at his lips. "Just remember this," Izzy said, her eyes sparkling. "We always got each other's backs, no matter what. And this knot? It's a promise, Thorne, an unbreakable one." The harsh fluorescent light of the midnight beacon snapped Elias back to the present. He watched Leo, who, despite the gruff environment, carried himself with a quiet dignity, speaking softly to a trucker, then offering a gentle smile to a child. The way he moved, the subtle resilience in his eyes, it all felt familiar. Coincidence? Elias scoffed internally. There were no coincidences when it came to a knot like that. A desperate, fragile hope began to flicker in the dark corners of his weary mind. Leo, perhaps sensing the unusual intensity of Elias's gaze, glanced up. Their eyes met for a fleeting second before Leo, with a slight shrug, turned back to wipe down the counter, dismissing the chief's attention as just another oddity of the late shift. Back in his sparsely decorated apartment, the silence was deafening. Elias's gaze fell upon an old framed photograph on his nightstand. Izzy, her vibrant smile frozen in time, a painful reminder of a life cut tragically short. He picked it up, his thumb tracing her face. He remembered the day she died, the chaos, the horror. And then, the infant son, Izzy's son, lost to the system in the aftermath. A child he had promised her he would protect. The knot, that impossible knot, brought back the crushing weight of his failure, a promise broken, a life he couldn't save. The guilt had been a constant companion for 20 years. The next morning, Chief Elias Thorne sat behind his imposing oak desk, the scent of stale coffee clinging to the air. Lieutenant Miller, sharp-suited and perpetually by the book, stood opposite him, a faint frown creasing his brow. "Chief, you want a full background check on a barista from the Midnight Beacon? For community outreach?" Miller's voice held a polite, yet unmistakable note of skepticism. "Isn't that a bit unusual for your purview, sir?" Elias met his gaze, his own eyes heavy with a sleepless night but burning with a quiet intensity. "Lieutenant, sometimes community outreach requires a deeper understanding of our local demographics. This isn't up for debate. Get it done, and discreetly." The warning in Elias's tone was clear, leaving no room for further questions. Miller nodded, a flicker of unease in his eyes, but he knew better than to push. Hours later, Elias found himself in the precinct archives, a cavernous space where decades of forgotten stories lay buried under layers of dust. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and neglect. He spent what felt like an eternity sifting through yellowed adoption papers and social service records, a grim testament to lives swallowed by the system. Finally, his fingers brushed against a thin, heavily redacted file. Baby boy Rossi. His breath caught. The pages offered little, a cold, impersonal summary of a child found, placed, and then, inexplicably, forgotten. No follow-up. No trace. A wave of profound frustration washed over Elias, mingled with a sorrow that felt too familiar. The system, designed to protect, had failed. It had always been this cold, this uncaring. Miles away, in a cramped apartment above a sputtering mechanic shop, Leo Maxwell was lost in a world of his own making. Sunlight, filtered through dusty windows, illuminated a miniature set model, a fantastical cityscape for a play that existed only in his dreams. His hands, usually busy with coffee cups, now meticulously arranged tiny buildings, his brow furrowed in concentration. The chime of his laptop broke the spell. A rejection email for a local theater gig. He sighed, a familiar pang of disappointment, but his shoulders remained unslumped. Leo reached for a worn, unlabeled sketchbook, its cover soft with age. A silent, comforting presence. He flipped through pages filled with intricate knot designs, unaware of the deeper story they held. Persistence, he murmured to himself, is its own art. That evening, Elias returned to the Midnight Beacon. He chose a booth tucked away in a corner, obscured by a faded plastic plant, his eyes never leaving Leo. The diner hummed with the usual late-night rhythm, clattering plates, hushed conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. He watched Leo move with the same quiet efficiency, clearing tables. Then, it happened again. Leo gathered a full trash bag, his hands moving with practiced ease, and tied it off. The knot. Identical. Complex, unmistakable. A surge of conviction, cold and hard, hit Elias. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be, but beneath the certainty, a trepidation stirred. What if he was right? What impossible truth would unravel? He paid his bill, leaving a generous tip, his gaze lingering on Leo, a man now irrevocably linked to his past. Later, parked in his cruiser across the street, Elias watched as Leo emerged from the diner, a weary silhouette against the neon glow. He walked alone, his shoulders hunched slightly against the night chill. Elias felt an overwhelming sense of protectiveness rise within him, a powerful, almost paternal instinct that had lain dormant for 2 decades. It was the same feeling he'd had for Izzy's child, a promise he'd failed to keep. The knot wasn't just a memory, it was a beacon, a thread leading him back to a life he'd lost. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He would find the truth. He would right this wrong. No matter the cost, he would fulfill the promise he'd made to Izzy, to her son. His engine rumbled to life, a singular purpose now driving him into the night. What secret is a chief willing to risk his career to uncover? Chief Elias Thorne's office, usually a bastion of quiet authority, felt like a pressure cooker this crisp morning. Lieutenant Miller stood across from his desk, a neatly compiled folder in his hand, his posture stiff with barely concealed disapproval. Chief, with all due respect, another deep dive into a barista's background? 4. Security concerns? Miller's voice, usually a steady drone, was laced with an unfamiliar edge of skepticism. This is highly irregular, sir. Our resources are stretched thin as it is, and frankly, it's not standard procedure for the chief to personally oversee such mundane inquiries. Elias met Miller's gaze, his own eyes like chips of flint. Lieutenant, I assure you, my judgment is sound. This isn't mundane. There are elements at play here you wouldn't understand. Just get me the full report, no stone unturned, and I don't want to hear another word about it. His voice, though low, carried an unmistakable steel that brooked no argument. Miller's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. Understood, Chief. He turned to leave, but his eyes lingered on Elias for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, a silent question hanging in the air. The shocking truth of a lost child's forgotten past begins to emerge. The social services building was a labyrinth of echoing hallways and forgotten hopes, smelling faintly of old paper and stale coffee. Elias, leveraging every ounce of his authority, finally stood before a dusty filing cabinet in a room where light seemed to fear to tread. He found it. A thin yellowed file marked Maxwell Leo, Case 7703B. His fingers trembled as he opened it. The contents were heartbreakingly sparse. A birth date, approximate, a note that he was found as a toddler, no parents identified, no unique identifying marks. Just a child, adrift. Elias felt a familiar, crushing wave of sorrow. This was the cold, indifferent face of the system that had swallowed Izzy's son. A grainy, black-and-white photo fell from the file. A solemn-faced boy, perhaps 5 years old, with huge, watchful eyes that stared out, lost. It tugged at something deep within Elias, a pang of recognition, a profound ache for the lost years. He closed the file, the paper thin, but the weight of the lost life within it, immense. A mother's tender moments hide a secret that will unravel years later. Flashback to Izzy's small, cluttered apartment, a few days before her death. The air was warm, filled with the soft gurgle of a baby and the low hum of Izzy's voice. Isabella Rossi, not Detective Rossi here, but simply Izzy, a mother, gently rocked her infant son, his tiny fingers curled around hers. "My sweet Leo," she murmured, her voice soft as a lullaby. "You'll be an artist, just like your father. You have his hands, you know, strong but so gentle." She smiled, a tender, wistful expression. "He'd be so proud of you. I worry sometimes about everything, but I know you're meant for great things." She reached for a soft baby blanket, a delicate, handmade thing. With practiced ease, she tied a small, decorative knot at one corner, the intricate, unique knot that Elias knew so well. It was a secret flourish, a mother's touch, a silent promise woven into the fabric of her son's life. The lullaby faded, and the scene dissolved into a poignant silence. A hidden clue in a 20-year-old murder file could blow the case wide open. Back in his office, Elias sat surrounded by stacks of decades-old police reports, the faint smell of dust and forgotten tragedies clinging to the pages. He was sifting through Izzy's murder investigation file, every word a ghost from his past. Most of it he knew by heart, every bullet point, every witness statement. But this time, he wasn't looking for answers about the crime. He was looking for connections, for whispers of a forgotten life. His eyes scanned a list of peripheral witnesses, names he dismissed as unimportant at the time. Then, a name jumped out, stopping his breath in his throat. Marcus Thorne, local artist, witnessed commotion near scene. Shark, his own family name. Marcus, his distant cousin, the struggling artist whose wild talent had been a source of both pride and quiet concern in the family. Elias had barely remembered him being at the scene, a background figure in the chaos. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through him. Could it be? The pieces, long scattered, were beginning to align. Elias grabbed his phone, a new, desperate urgency in his movements. The chief uncovers a secret love, a hidden child, and a betrayal that changed everything. The abandoned art studio, rumored to be Marcus Thorne's old haunt, was a ghost of creativity. Graffiti-covered walls, broken windows, the smell of damp earth and faded paint. Elias moved through the derelict space, feeling a strange, melancholic connection to the echoes of artistic passion. He ran his hand along a crumbling brick wall, and his fingers found it. A loose brick, yielding to pressure. Behind it, a small, hidden compartment. Inside, nestled among cobwebs and dust, was a small, wooden box. His heart pounded. Personal effects of Marcus Thorne. Elias opened it. A worn leather wallet, a few paintbrushes, and then a faded photograph. It showed a younger Marcus, his eyes intense and bright, his arm wrapped around a smiling, vibrant Izzy. On the back, in Marcus's elegant looping script, was a dedication that stole Elias's breath. Asterisk, to Izzy, for our son, Leo. Always, asterisk. Tucked beneath the photo was a small, hand-knotted cord, identical to the knot Leo tied. Elias gasped, a choked, agonizing sound. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a physical blow. Grief, shock, and an undeniable, earth-shattering confirmation flooded him. Witness the hidden world of a barista dreaming of a grander stage. Sunlight, a rare visitor in his cramped apartment above the mechanic shop, streamed through the single grimy window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Leo Maxwell, however, was oblivious to the mundane. His world was a canvas, a sprawling, fantastical landscape for a community theater's upcoming production of Asterix: A Midsummer Night's Dream. He hummed softly, a wordless tune, as his brush danced across the backdrop, adding a delicate, shimmering layer to a painted forest. "No, not quite right," he murmured to himself, tilting his head. "It needs more. Magic. More wonder. A place where anything is possible, not just another greasy diner." He envisioned the stage lights hitting his work, the audience gasping. A life beyond the clatter of plates and the smell of stale coffee. A deep, solitary focus settled over him, a quiet hum of creative energy that also whispered of the loneliness only an artist can truly know. He glanced at the cheap digital clock on his workbench. A sigh escaped him. Time to clean up. The dream could wait. The diner couldn't. Behind a barista's smile, a hidden yearning for family. The lunch rush at the Midnight Beacon was a relentless, clanging symphony of orders and shouted conversations. Leo moved through it with practiced ease, refilling coffees, wiping down counters, his face a mask of polite efficiency. His mind, though, drifted. He watched a young family at a corner booth, the mother laughing as her toddler smeared ketchup on his father's nose. A wave of something soft and aching washed over Leo, a quiet longing for a connection he'd never known. He'd seen countless families, countless couples, in this diner, and each time, a small pang resonated within him, a reminder of the empty space where his own family should have been. He quickly shook his head, pushing the wistful feeling down. There was no time for sentimentality here, just orders, tips, and the relentless grind. He retreated to the back, grabbing a fresh roll of paper towels, seeking a moment of solitude amidst the chaos. A young man's search for the truth about his mysterious past. Later that evening, back in his apartment, the fantastical forest of his paintings seemed a world away. Leo sat at his small table, poring over a stack of old, brittle documents, his adoption papers. The words were familiar, etched into his memory. Child found, approximately 2 years old. Parents unknown. Father unknown. That line always snagged his attention, a perpetual unanswered question. He often wondered about them, his birth parents. Where did his artistic impulses come from? Was his father an artist, too? He picked up a small, plain wooden carving, smoothed by years of handling. It was the only object he'd been given by the orphanage director, a small, intricate motif carved into one side, a subtle, familiar knot. He'd carried it with him his entire life, a tangible link to a past shrouded in mystery. He sighed, gathering the papers, tucking them back into a worn folder. Some questions, it seemed, were destined to remain unanswered. The chief watches a young man, unaware their lives are about to collide. Across the street, shrouded in the deepening night, Chief Elias Thorne sat in his unmarked car. The faint glow of Leo's apartment window was his only beacon. In his hand, he clutched the faded photograph. Marcus Thorne and Izzy, young and full of life. He watched as Leo's silhouette moved behind the sheer curtains, a familiar grace to his movements. There it was again, the echo of Marcus, his distant cousin, in the young man's posture, a certain artistic aura that emanated even from a distance. The weight of his discovery, the promise he'd made to Izzy all those years ago, pressed down on Elias, heavier than any badge. He had found him. The knot, the photo, the name, it was all coalescing into an impossible, heartbreaking truth. He couldn't just watch anymore. He started the engine, the low growl breaking the silence of the night. It was time to act. A mother's dreams for her son echo through time, guiding a chief's desperate search. The memory hit Elias like a physical blow, a surge of warmth and then a profound chill. He was back in the rattling patrol car, 20 years younger, listening to Izzy talk about her son. "He's got his dad's hands, Elias," she'd said, her eyes shining, a vibrant smile on her face. "Always drawing, even at a year old. Marcus thinks he'll be a great artist, like him." Her voice, usually so strong, held a tremor of worry. "Just wish I could give him more. A stable life, you know. Not this." She gestured vaguely at their patrol car, the passing city lights. Elias had reached out, squeezing her arm. "Hey." He's got you, Izzy. And he's got me. We'll always be there for him. Always. Her laughter, bright and full of hope, had filled the small space. Now, sitting alone in his car, the memory faded, leaving Elias haunted by the promise he'd made. A promise he was determined, at last, to keep. A few days later, the sterile order of Chief Elias Thorne's office was shattered by the arrival of Lieutenant Miller. Miller, usually a picture of starched professionalism, held a thick folder clutched in his hand, his face tight, with barely suppressed indignation. He didn't wait for Elias to invite him to sit. "Chief," he began, his voice clipped, "this is a report detailing your recent inquiries." He slapped the folder onto the desk. Elias's gaze, steady and unwavering, met his subordinates. Inside, Miller had compiled a meticulous list of every subtle request Elias had made, every old file pulled. "Unusual, Chief. Highly unusual. You're investigating a barista, a civilian, with resources far beyond what's warranted. Some might call it an obsession. Some might even suggest you're unwell." Elias's jaw tightened. He knew this moment would come. "My judgment is not in question, Lieutenant." Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Perhaps it is. I'm giving you an ultimatum, sir. Drop this. Now. Or I will be forced to submit this report to Internal Affairs, and you will face a formal inquiry. Your career, Chief, hangs in the balance." The threat hung heavy in the air, a cold, hard choice laid bare. Miller's gaze was unyielding, a reflection of the system Elias was fighting. What secret is a chief willing to risk his career to uncover? Night had fallen, painting Elias Thorne's sparsely decorated apartment in shades of charcoal and shadow. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city. He sat at his kitchen table, the damning report Miller had presented still burning in his mind. His career, the decades of dedication, the respect he'd painstakingly earned, all of it could be stripped away. In his hand, he clutched the faded photograph of Izzy and Marcus, their youthful faces a poignant echo of a life interrupted. Beside it, the small, intricate knot he'd found in Marcus's old studio. He ran a thumb over the rough cord, feeling its familiar texture. He knew the risks. He'd known them from the moment he saw that knot in Leo's hands. But how could he walk away? How could he abandon Izzy's son again, knowing the truth was within his grasp? The crushing weight of his past failure, the silent promise he'd made to Izzy's memory, solidified into an unshakable resolve. He would not stop. Not now. Not ever. With a deep, steadying breath, Elias picked up his phone. His voice, when he spoke, was firm, devoid of hesitation. A chief makes a life-altering choice. Duty or a promise from the past? At the Midnight Beacon, the dinner rush was in full swing, a cacophony of clattering plates and shouted orders. Leo moved through it all with practiced grace, wiping down tables, refilling coffees. His mind a whirlwind of set design ideas for the community play. But the rhythm felt off tonight. His manager, a portly man named Dave, usually gruff but fair, had been uncharacteristically cold. "Maxwell, tables 7 and 9 are still dirty," Dave snapped, his voice tight. "And where's that order for booth 12? You're slowing down tonight." Leo, already moving to table 7, felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. "Sorry, Dave, I'm getting to it." Later, Dave called him aside. "Look, Leo, I've had some complaints. Unspecified, but serious enough. I'm cutting your hours for the next 2 weeks. We need someone more consistent." Leo's stomach dropped. His artistic dreams, already fragile, felt like they were slipping through his fingers. He knew something was wrong. A subtle pressure he couldn't name, but the financial strain was immediate, suffocating. He cleaned the last table, his movements heavy, and left early, the diner's harsh fluorescent lights feeling like a spotlight on his defeat. An innocent barista's life is mysteriously turned upside down. Back in his cramped apartment above the mechanic shop, Leo stared at the stack of bills on his worn wooden table. Rent, utilities, the endless stream of expenses that chipped away at his meager diner earnings. His set design sketches, usually a source of joy, lay discarded, overshadowed by the stark reality of his financial predicament. The manager's words echoed in his head. a cruel reminder of his precarious existence. He traced the lines of a fantastical cityscape he'd drawn, a world so far removed from his own. Could he sell some of his art supplies? His brushes, his paints, the tools of his passion? The thought was a cold, sharp stab. It felt like selling a piece of his soul. He reached for the small, plain wooden carving that sat on his windowsill, the one item the orphanage director had given him. Its smooth, cool surface was a comfort, the subtle knot motif worn smooth by his touch. It was his only tangible link to a past he couldn't remember, a quiet symbol of resilience. He would find another way. He had to. He wouldn't let the world steal his art, not yet. The heartbreaking choice between survival and a dream. Elias found Desk Sergeant Ramirez hunched over a cold cup of coffee in a quiet corner of the precinct, the late-night shift a familiar, lonely companion. Ramirez, a man whose tenure predated Elias's own, had known Izzy well. He'd seen Elias's grief, his quiet struggle after her death. "Ramirez," Elias began, his voice low, "I need your help. Off the books." He recounted the story. The knot. Leo, the orphanage file. Omitting only the full, devastating truth he'd yet to fully piece together. Ramirez listened, his grizzled face etched with a deep, sympathetic understanding. Izzy, she had a way of keeping secrets, he mused, stirring his coffee. Said she had a Max place for important stuff, something personal. A small locker at that old community center, down by the river, the one that closed up years ago. Said she used it to store some old art supplies for a project with a friend. A spark ignited in Elias's chest, a glimmer of hope cutting through the bureaucratic gloom. A community center. A locker. Art supplies. It all fit. He grabbed a pen and a crumpled napkin, his hand trembling slightly as Ramirez drew a rough map. A chief's last hope rests on a forgotten secret and an old friend's memory. The air in the derelict community center storage room hung heavy with the scent of dust and forgotten things, a mausoleum of lost municipal ambitions. Elias Thorne moved through the gloom, his flashlight beam cutting through the motes dancing in the stale air. Sergeant Ramirez's memory had been a faint whisper, but it proved true. Tucked away in a forgotten corner behind stacks of broken chairs was a row of ancient, rusting lockers. The one marked 14B was ajar, its lock long since corroded. Elias's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Inside, nestled beneath a tattered blanket, was a small, wooden box. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he lifted the lid. There, enshrined in the box, lay a small leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with time. A folded letter, creased and worn, lay beside it. And then, a tiny, scuffed baby's shoe, impossibly small, impossibly poignant. Elias carefully picked up the diary. His partner's elegant script filled the first page. For my son, Leo, my artist, my light. He flipped through, reading of Izzy's profound love for Marcus, their shared dreams for their boy. Each word was a fresh wound, a vindication, and a heartbreaking echo of a life stolen too soon. The memory hit Elias with the force of a physical blow, dragging him back 2 decades. Sirens screamed, blurring into a cacophony of chaos. The alley reeked of cordite and fear. Izzy, fearless, had pushed him out of the line of fire, taking the bullet meant for him. He remembered the sickening thud, the way her eyes, usually so vibrant, glazed over. Marcus, his distant cousin, had been there, a ghost in the periphery, his face contorted in agony as he watched Izzy fall. But in the ensuing pandemonium, the police had moved in, not just for the shooter, but for Marcus too, on old, minor warrants. Elias, bleeding from a graze wound, saw Marcus being led away in handcuffs, his shouts drowned out by the chaos. And then, the baby. Izzy's baby, a tiny bundle in a makeshift sling, left unattended amidst the flashing lights and frantic shouts. Elias tried to move, to reach him, but his leg buckled. He watched, helpless, as a woman in a drab uniform, a social worker, scooped up the wailing infant. Lost to the system, a voice echoed in his mind, the words a raw internal scream, the last image before darkness claimed him. was the baby's tiny, flailing hand disappearing into the back of a sterile vehicle. Back in the sterile quiet of his office, the full, devastating weight of the truth settled on Elias. Izzy's diary, Marcus's faded photograph, Leo's sparse orphanage file, they lay scattered across his desk, each piece a shard of a shattered life. Leo wasn't just lost. He was a victim of a cruel confluence of events, a systemic failure masked by tragedy. Elias hadn't just lost a partner. He had, through his own helplessness, lost a child he'd vowed to protect. The guilt, a familiar, dull ache, now sharpened into a searing pain. He traced the lines of Izzy's script, her dreams for her son so vivid, so real. He had failed her. He had failed Marcus. Most agonizingly, he had failed Leo. A single hot tear carved a path down his weathered cheek, but with the sorrow came a fierce, unyielding resolve. This wasn't just about righting a wrong, it was about reclaiming a future. He stood, his gaze hardening, a new purpose burning in his eyes. He would rectify this. No matter the cost. The fluorescent hum of the diner still echoed in Leo's ears, but the morning light in his apartment brought a different kind of buzz. He'd spent another sleepless night wrestling with overdue bills, his set design sketches pushed aside in favor of grim calculations. The dream of a grander stage felt impossibly distant. Then his laptop chimed. A new email. From the community theater, not a rejection this time, but an offer. A small, paid gig, designing the set for their annual summer production. It wasn't Broadway, but it was Tucson and something. A lifeline. A validation. A surge of pure, unadulterated relief washed over him, chasing away the shadows of doubt. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a small, genuine smile finally gracing his lips. He quickly called his friend, Maya, his voice bubbling with uncharacteristic excitement. This was a start. He looked at the small wooden carving on his desk, its subtle knot motif, a familiar comfort. A strange sense of peace settled over him, a quiet hope that things, finally, might be looking up. He was unaware of the deeper, seismic shifts already in motion. The scent of stale coffee and fryer grease clung to Leo as he wiped down the counter at the midnight beacon. It was late, the diner mostly empty, when a figure appeared at his station. Chief Elias Thorne. Impeccably uniformed, his presence instantly commanded attention, making the small space feel even smaller. Leo's heart gave a nervous lurch. The chief had been in the diner too often lately, his gaze too intense. Was this about the trash bags? The subtle pressure from his manager, Maxwell. Elias said, his voice calm but with an underlying firmness that left no room for argument. I need to speak with you. Outside. After your shift. Leo's stomach tightened. He glanced at the clock, then at the chief's unreadable face. Yes, Chief, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Of course. Elias simply nodded, his eyes lingering on Leo for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, a look Leo couldn't decipher. Then, just as silently as he arrived, the chief turned and walked out. Leo watched him go, his hands clammy, a profound sense of apprehension seizing him. The confrontation he'd unconsciously dreaded was finally here. The harsh glow of a lone streetlight painted long shadows on the quiet street corner, illuminating the breath that plumed from Leo's lips. He shifted, hands tucked into his pockets, acutely aware of Chief Elias Thorne's unwavering gaze. The chief, stoic and imposing even out of uniform, cut a figure of quiet authority. Leo, Elias began, his voice surprisingly gentle yet firm. I've seen you tie a knot. The one for the trash bags, outside the diner. It's unique. Where did you learn it? Leo's brow furrowed, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Just always knew it, Chief, he mumbled, his gaze darting to the ground. An old caretaker at the orphanage, maybe? It was just a way. Elias saw the guardedness, the automatic deflection of a young man used to keeping parts of himself hidden. He recognized the fear of the unknown in Leo's eyes, the apprehension of a man who'd learned early on that attention often meant trouble. Elias took a deep, steadying breath. The difficult truth was about to unravel. Elias reached into his jacket, pulling out a faded, creased photograph. The edges were soft with time, but the image was still clear. "This woman," Elias said, holding it out. "Her name was Isabella Rossi. Izzy. She was my partner." Leo took the photo, his fingers trembling as they brushed the old paper. His eyes widened, fixing on the vibrant, intelligent smile of the young woman. A jolt, like an electric current, ran through him. He'd seen that smile before, in the hazy, half-forgotten dreams of childhood. A face without a name, a voice without a sound. Beside her stood a man with intense, artistic eyes, a strange familiarity in his posture. And this man, Marcus Thorne, Elias continued, his voice thick with emotion. "He was your father, Leo, and Izzy was your mother." Leo stared, the photo blurring as hot, unstoppable tears welled in his eyes. A lifetime of unspoken questions, of a hollow ache for roots, surged to the surface. He clutched the photograph, a lifeline to a past he never knew existed. A sudden jarring intrusion shattered the fragile moment. A police cruiser, its headlights cutting through the dim street, screeched to a halt at the curb. Lieutenant Miller emerged, his face a mask of cold fury, flanked by 2 patrol officers. "Chief Thorne!" Miller's voice sliced through the night, sharp and accusatory. "What in God's name do you think you're doing? Harassing a civilian? This is highly unprofessional conduct. I warned you. I'm ordering you to cease this investigation immediately, or I'll have you arrested." Leo flinched, shrinking back, the photo still clutched in his hand. The sudden flashing lights, the harsh voices of authority overwhelmed him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a primal fear seizing him. He felt the immense, unbridgeable gulf between his world and theirs, a chasm of power and control. I'm not doing anything wrong," Leo stammered, his voice barely a whisper, terrified. Elias, his jaw clenched, stepped forward, placing himself between Miller and Leo, a silent, defiant shield. Elias turned to Miller, his eyes blazing with a fury that startled even the seasoned lieutenant. "You want to know what I'm doing, Miller?" His voice boomed, raw and powerful, shaking the quiet street. "I'm fulfilling a promise. This young man," he gestured to Leo, "is Isabella Rossi's son, my partner's son. The child we lost to a broken system, the child I swore to protect." He pulled Izzy's worn diary and Marcus's letter from his pocket, holding them aloft like irrefutable evidence. "This is her diary. This is his father's letter. Undeniable proof of who he is, of a love and a legacy that was stolen from him." Miller recoiled, his face paling, the cold logic of his bureaucratic world shattering under the weight of Elias's raw emotion and the tangible proof. His mouth opened, but no words came. The patrol officers, seeing their lieutenant's stunned silence, hesitantly backed away, their resolve crumbling. Elias's voice, now filled with a triumphant anguish, echoed in the sudden quiet. Elias's voice softened, though the intensity in his eyes remained. He turned back to Leo, who stood frozen, tears still streaming down his face, clutching the photograph. "Marcus Thorne, your father," Elias began, his voice a balm. "He was an artist, just like you. Brilliant. He loved your mother fiercely, and he loved you. That knot, that unbreakable knot, it was his too. He taught it to Izzy, a symbol of their bond, of a promise to always find their way back to each other." Leo's eyes, wide with disbelief and dawning understanding, darted to the small, plain wooden carving he always carried, the one with the subtle knot motif. He pulled it from his pocket, holding it next to the photo. The knot on the carving was identical. A legacy, a message from a father he never knew. Elias placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, a gesture weighty with decades of unspoken grief, unfulfilled vows, and now unimaginable hope. "It's a legacy, Leo," Elias murmured. "It's who you are." Lieutenant Miller stood frozen, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning shame. The flashing police lights, once a symbol of his authority, now seemed to mock his rigid adherence to rules. Elias's furious declaration had ripped through the carefully constructed facade of Miller's world, revealing a raw, human truth he couldn't process with a checklist. He finally understood the chief's obsession, and the realization burned him. "Chief, I apologize," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper, eyes darting from Elias to Leo, unable to meet either's gaze. His posture, usually so ramrod straight, seemed to sag. His authority, shattered by the weight of a 20-year-old injustice, offered no comfort. Without another word he turned, a defeated figure melting into the night, leaving the quiet street to its rightful inheritors. The harsh glare of the streetlights was replaced by the warm, dim glow of Leo's apartment. Elias and Leo sat across from each other, the small space feeling vast, with the weight of decades. Elias gently placed Izzy's worn diary and Marcus's faded letter into Leo's trembling hands. Leo's fingers, usually so steady with a paintbrush, fumbled as he opened the diary. His eyes, wide and glistening, scanned the elegant script, a mother's forgotten voice speaking to him from the past. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down his cheeks as he read of Izzy's dreams for him, her love for Marcus, her hopes for his artistic future. She knew I'd be an artist," Leo choked out, the words a revelation that settled deep into his soul. "And my father? What was he like?" Elias, his own eyes wet, answered with every heartfelt detail, painting a picture of Marcus Thorne, the passionate artist, the loving father, the man who had woven an unbreakable knot into their shared destiny. Leo finished reading, the diary and letter clutched to his chest. He looked at Elias, a lifetime of questions finally answered, a void finally filled. I don't know what to say," he whispered, overwhelmed. Elias reached out, his calloused hand gently covering Leo's. "You don't have to say anything, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion, a name he hadn't dared to speak aloud for 20 years. "You're not alone anymore. You're family. And I am so sorry, Leo. Sorry I didn't find you sooner. But I promise you, I'm here now. For good." The words, a balm to Leo's wounded soul, broke the last dam. A profound sense of belonging, a warmth he had never known, washed over him. He launched himself across the small space, embracing Elias, a desperate, grateful hug that spoke of shared sorrow, profound relief, and the unbreakable bond of a newly found family. The embrace lingered, a silent promise exchanged between a father figure and a son finally home. A few days later, Elias's sparsely decorated apartment was transformed. Leo arrived with his meager belongings, a beat-up suitcase, a box overflowing with art supplies, and the small, plain wooden carving, his only tangible link to an unknown past. Elias met him at the door, a welcoming smile softening his usually stern features. "Welcome home, Leo," he said, gesturing to a spare room, now cleared of storage and made ready with a fresh bed. Leo's eyes widened, taking in the clean, bright space. It was simple, but it was come-loose. Later they shared a quiet meal at Elias's kitchen table, the clinking of forks against plates a comforting rhythm. There was no need for grand pronouncements, just a comfortable, unspoken understanding, a new family unit settling into its unexpected, yet perfect, rhythm. Leo looked around, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. He was finally home. The sun shone down on the quiet, manicured lawn of the city cemetery. Elias and Leo stood before a simple headstone, the name Isabella Rossi etched into its cool surface. Elias placed a vibrant bouquet of wildflowers, their colors a stark contrast to the gray stone. Leo, his voice soft but clear, spoke to his mother, a conversation 20 years overdue. "Mom, I'm an artist, just like you wanted. I got a gig, a real one. And I found Elias. He's family." He paused, a gentle smile touching his lips. Elias, his own eyes glistening, carefully placed Marcus's faded letter and the small, knotted cord from the art studio onto the grave, a silent, profound completion of a circle. The simple act felt like a promise kept, a legacy honored. They stood for a long moment, side by side, two men forged into a family by love, loss, and the enduring echo of an unbreakable knot, The air in the community theater buzzed with an electric current of anticipation and joy. Leo Maxwell, no longer just a barista, beamed as he greeted guests, a proud flush on his cheeks. His set design, a vibrant, whimsical cityscape for the local play, drew gasps of admiration and murmurs of praise. Colors exploded across the stage, a testament to a talent long dormant. From the back row, Chief Elias Thorne watched, a quiet, contented smile, softening the lines of his face. His heart swelled with a pride he hadn't known was possible. Leo glanced back, catching Elias's eye, and in that shared, meaningful look, a silent testament to their unbreakable bond passed between them. It was a triumph not just for Leo, but for them both. A few months later, Elias Thorne's garage, once a repository of forgotten tools, had been transformed into a small, vibrant art studio. Easels stood where dusty shelves once were, the scent of oil paint replacing stale motor oil. Leo, patient and encouraging, was teaching Elias basic sketching techniques. "Hold it looser, Chief," Leo chuckled, guiding Elias's surprisingly steady hand. "Let the charcoal breathe." Elias, gruff but genuinely engaged, found a new passion in the lines and shadows. They talked for hours, sharing stories, laughter echoing off the newly painted walls. The small wooden carving, Leo's only tangible link to his birth father, now sat proudly on a shelf, a constant reminder of the journey that had led them to this warm, domestic healing. In the quiet of Chief Thorne's office, Lieutenant Miller stood, a posture of respectful contrition replacing his usual sternness. "Chief," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I was wrong. About everything." He met Elias's gaze, a flicker of genuine regret in his eyes. "I misjudged the situation, and your character. I apologize." Elias nodded slowly, the weight of Miller's words settling between them. He had seen too much to hold a grudge. "Apology accepted, Miller," Elias said, his voice firm but gracious. A silent understanding, a rebuilding of trust passed between the two men. Miller, a lighter step in his stride, turned and exited, leaving Elias with a sense of peace. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, where Elias and Leo sat on a bench, watching children play. Their conversation flowed easily, planning trips, future set design projects for Leo, and even a new community art program Elias was helping to fund. "I feel like finding my family. It just unlocked something," Leo mused, gazing at the vibrant scene. "My creativity, my sense of belonging, it's all connected." Elias smiled, a profound peace settling over him. "True legacy isn't about wealth or status, son," he said, his voice gentle. "It's about the bonds we forge, the love we share, and the promises we keep." They shared a warm, knowing smile, looking out at the world with newfound contentment. A close-up on a piece of rope reveals familiar hands, swiftly, expertly, tying the intricate, unique knot that had started it all. The camera pulls back to show Leo Maxwell's hands, then Elias Thorne's, working together on a large, elaborate set piece. Leo secures a prop with the knot, then Elias, with a proud, almost paternal grin, adds his own finishing touch, tightening it with a practiced flick of his wrist. Their hands move in unison, a silent, powerful testament to their connection, a bond forged in tragedy and rediscovered through an unbreakable thread of love. They look at each other, a shared smile lighting their faces. A new family, a new future.